this is a recurring thing on the Charles Coleman podcast because it is something that you may be hearing for the first time now, but you're going to hear me talk about a lot during the course of following your brand new favorite podcast, the Charles Coleman podcast, which brings me to another point. This is a great time. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button down at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you're following us anywhere where podcasts are heard, Apple Music, Tidal, Spotify, any of the above, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you share, make sure you follow us on the socials. Just search Charles Coleman Podcast, all one word. That's where we are. My name is Charles Coleman. You can follow me. Do not slide in my DMs. I will not hit you back.
Stop lying.
Maybe. But all jokes aside. So today, I have this thing. And GU and I have talked about it a little bit before. I've talked about it with Cashmere on different occasions. And it is simply, do you believe in the Negro? And a lot of people hear me talk about this and they sort of like flinch because they're like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And I'm gonna get real explicit really quickly. And I don't mean explicit in the sense of vulgar or ribald. I mean explicit in the sense of clear.
Right.
The Negro, I am using in the question here as representing and representative of an era. The Negro is a time that exists before we are African American, before we are Afro anything, before there is a clear and distinct association with Black people in America, there is the Negro. The Negro exists after we were nigger. The Negro exists at the point that we are no longer in physical bondage. And so we have to be recognized as more than a slave, but less than American.
Right.
And so for us, this is a particular point in time where we had just enough to make our own way, but not enough where anything was really given to us to sort of be a part of anything else that we didn't create for ourselves. And so I'm talking about Greenwood. I'm talking about Rosewood. I'm talking about Tulsa. I'm talking about Black Wall Street. I'm talking about that era.
Right.
Because that is the era of the Negro. It is an era where your butcher was Black, your grocer was Black, your doctor was Black, your accountant was Black, because that's all we had.
Right.
Right? And so it was a self-sustaining model. I talk to people about what it means and what it would mean to have this conversation around community, because we throw around the word community a lot. Oh yeah, the community. And I'm always curious to understand what people are referring to about that, because I feel like community is something that just doesn't exist on its own. It has to actually be built.
Right.
There are things that are needed to create it such that you can't just assume its existence. So when I ask the question, do you believe in the Negro? It really is a question about, do you believe in our ability to create community where it does not exist?
Right.
I think about, particularly in the pandemic, what it was to watch the world pivot. And really what started to get me thinking about this was education. So I have a niece and my mom is a retired school teacher. And to make a long story short, during the height of the pandemic, my mom and a few of her educator friends basically formed an educational co-op with my sister, my niece, and some of her classmates. And my mom was lending her expertise as a teacher in literally what had become a schoolhouse in some space that my sister had for my niece and a few other children.
Right.
And then there were some other educators who were in the church, who were in her sorority, who began to participate in that. And I started thinking about, we have all these conversations, like we want to get upset about, oh, they're taking CRT out the schools, or they're trying to ban that, or they're taking these books out. That is in part a function of us relying on other people to do for us what we can do for ourselves.
Right.
If you're someone who wants to start with an excuse as to, well, it's not going to work because da-da-da-da. My argument is, well, then you don't believe in a Negro. You don't believe in our ability to get it done.
Right.
Is that realistic? What are your thoughts? Do you believe in the Negro?
I absolutely believe in the Negro. I think that it's important for us to always identify a space in which we could kind of like pull our efforts together, right? You know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, as a business professional, when I'm looking for resources, I'm always looking to identify Black first. You know what I'm saying? There's a certain level of trust that I know exists there. I know there's a certain level of cultural understanding that's already kind of built into it. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that I know for me, that's my first approach. But believing in the Negro really means you're willing to kind of to go out of your way.
Right. And see, that's a huge piece. I'm so glad you said that, because I had a conversation with someone when I was going over the production notes. And they were like, well, you're underestimating, it's not necessary. Because I said that for me, and I want to get your take on where it starts.
Right.
But I said for me, it starts economically.
Right.
Right? Like if you're not willing to use the services and goods that come from your community and pay for them, and in some cases, pay more for them.
Right.
Right? Like you and I have had this conversation. You don't really believe in the Negro. Right? Like and they were like, well, some people just make decisions because that's what their pockets tell them. So if there's, a dollar here that something costs, and then over here costs $1.10, they're just going over here, so on and so forth, and in order to appease their personal budgets.
Right.
And I said, for the person who's legitimately in that space, I'm not mad at them.
Right.
Legitimately in that space. But there are actually very few people who are not in that space without consideration for a lack of discipline or determination. Like you said, you know what, I know this is gonna cost me a little bit more, but I believe in this, so I'm gonna support it. There's no community that's gonna be built anywhere without personal accountability and self-discipline.
Right.
None at all. So I think that's a big part of where we get tripped up. We want it to feel good.
Right.
We want it to be convenient. We want it to be easy.
Right.
I believe that it's more difficult than it is complicated. That's not to say that it's not complicated on some levels, but I think in a lot of ways, it's very straightforward.
Right.
It's just a question of, are you willing to sacrifice the comforts that you've become accustomed to in order to really get into that thing and engage it?
I understand what you're saying, and I think there is a large push of folks. I mean, look at our buying power. We're at like $3.5 trillion.
Trillion.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's a substantial amount of money. And if all of those dollars were directed directly to our community, we would be a force to be reckoned with. You know what I'm saying? But obviously, that's not the case. We're more brand driven. You know what I'm saying? And at the end of the day, making that conscious decision to buy Black is exactly that, making the conscious decision to buy Black. And there are a lot of people that are believing in the Negro and that go out of their way, that won't spend their dollars in other spaces and make that investment and make it understanding. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't expect every customer that comes into my door to understand the logistics and what I need to do to run my business, right? He's coming for a service. She wants a particular item. They just want to make that transaction and keep it moving. They want to come in and have an experience. You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, I am presenting something that's special and specific and unique. You know what I'm saying? And that's my way of kind of like building within the community. Because I want you to believe in the Negro, but I want you to believe in the Negro because I'm presenting the Negro in a way that's appetizing to your budget. Where you're just like, yeah, it's convenient. I could go over here because it's easier and it's closer. But there's something about that experience that resonates with me as a person that makes me want to go and put myself and spend the more money and go over there, inconvenience myself. I think that's a big, big part of it. For those that are not fiscally in a space to have those kind of decisions and are just kind of like moving based on what their budget can afford, understandable. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause at the end of the day, you got a woman with 3 kids, a single, and she's just got to make ends meet. You know what I'm saying?
I think there are a lot of people who are not in that space,
right,
but use that example to justify behavior that doesn't even apply.
Right.
In terms of community building, like for somebody who's listening or watching, and they're like, I believe in the Negro, I believe in sacrifices that are necessary to invest creating community.
Right.
Where do you think it starts? Like just from your personal.
I mean, I think culturally is important. I think it's a big feeder. Like I'm Haitian, right? My parents were born in Haiti. I was born here. When my guests come to the lounge, that are Haitian and find out that I'm Haitian, it's a natural click in their mind that, oh, now we got to support that. I got to come back. I got to go tell all my people. You know what I'm saying? And that's something that's culturally ingrained in us as a people. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you know who your people are, now you can't deviate away from that. You got to go and you got to go back and support. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that every culture has that same kind of like immediate connection. You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of it starts there. You know what I'm saying? For the spaces that it doesn't exist, I think the education is going to really be important. You know what I'm saying? To understand the value of that. You know what I'm saying? Because very often the consumer is uneducated. They're just looking for that transaction. They're not thinking about how that's impacting them in the long run or their community.
You really just made me think of something that I'm curious about. So you use the word culture, and I think that is where things kind of get a little tricky because there is this notion sometimes that when you're talking about culture, there's a connection immediately to community where it's intertwined.
Right.
And so in looking to support spaces where the culture exists or the culture is thriving, you're inherently supporting community. And that's not necessarily true. And I just would like your thoughts on how do you reconcile supporting culture when that culture is either owned, operated, financed, or by people who are not in community.
Right.
And that leaves you with the dichotomy. And I'll give you a basic example. This is not necessarily like the best example, but it's the one that came to my head. So you're talking about let's say an entertainment.
Right.
You're talking about a Black director who is employing Black people, who is working for, or who's telling a story or a narrative that is connected to us culturally.
Right.
Right? But in terms of who is on the bill producing it, getting the money from it, getting the ownership rights of it, owning the residuals and the royalties in perpetuity, it ain't none of us.
Right.
That's not putting money in community necessarily, but it is supporting the culture. So how do you parse that out? Because there's a separation.
I think it's complicated. You know what I'm saying? I think, depending on the respective industry you're talking to, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many, players in the game that sometimes you want to put out a product, and in order for it to get out and for it to be executed properly, you have to engage those systems. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no way to do it to do it successfully or to do it big enough because you need access to that budget. You know what I'm saying? So, I think it depends on the industry, you know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, we've seen so many trends where certain markets have opened up because of their leverage of our community. You know what I'm saying? And the question becomes, when we get to those spaces, are we going to make those right decisions to kind of continue to grow our community, or do we become blindsided by our success and really just feel like we just need a few tokens in the game and then I did my part?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that goes on, the onus on the person. You know what I'm saying? But it's each one teach one. It's one, I got a responsibility. You know what I'm saying? Like, as a brand manager, as a business owner at the lounge, if people that want to start businesses and they come to me, I'm always open to share. You know what I'm saying? I got this theory in my hand is that the same way my hand goes to receive is the same way my hand goes to give. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm always giving.
I spent many an evening in class at the Gloria Cherubin School of Business at 593 Washington Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. I have absolutely done that and can attest to that. My last question on this, and I will likely ask this, not even likely, I am going to ask this to everybody who I have this conversation with. Finish this sentence. You don't get a whole lot of time to think about it, but just finish this sentence. I believe in the Negro because.
I believe in the Negro because I am Negro. And I believe in myself. And I believe when we put ourselves first and we reconcile that identity crisis, it's not a challenge to support another brother or sister.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there it is.